Ready. So welcome everyone to the second in our lecture series with Donald Jackson. We're very excited to continue this lecture series. We have two more. I'll show you exactly what we did last time. And here we go. So the Society for Calligraphy is presenting this 2021 Master's Lecture Series with Donald Jackson called Painting with Words. And from Royal Scrolls to the St. John's Bible to Have I Had My Breakfast Yet? Master calligrapher Donald Jackson shares lessons and insights from a lifetime of working in letters. So last time we heard learning and luck, and this time we're going to be hearing earning and luck. Quills, gold leaf, and parchment. Who needs them? Keeping afloat over the years, making things in ways that matter to you, and for people who don't need them until they do. I'm moderator Kitty Marriott, founder and former president of SFC and honorary life member. And the Zoom was arranged by Christy Darwick as the master technician, fixing anything that ever goes wrong. She's also former president of SFC. So I'm very proud to introduce Donald Jackson again. And I'd like to say that he is very welcoming of the questions that you would like to offer to him. But if you would please type question mark, or the word question first in the chat, which is at the very bottom of the screen with kind of a little comic bubble. That would make it easier for me to gather the questions during his talk to present to Donald right at the very end. He will take some questions at various times too when it seems to be apropos, but please, I would like you to know that he is coming from Wales and that we are accommodating 27 different states and 21 different countries. And with such a Zoom with a huge participant audience, sometimes there are glitches in the Zoom functionality. So I would ask you to please have patience in case you are experiencing any of those kinds of problems. So I'm now going to stop my share and we'll go to Donald Jackson, who will commence with his lecture today.
Well, I'm still looking at Kitty, which is no problem, but I don't know where it leaves me at the moment.
You're on right now, so
very good, thank you.
Everyone else is muted. Christy has muted everyone, so it's
right,
your
thanks
show
a
now.
lot. Yeah, well, first of all, we'll have the first image, which is just to introduce you to where we are. And we are actually, those of you who've seen it before, I'll remind you, we are sitting just exactly, I am looking out of that window there in the border country of Wales. And with me in the room is Carlos Reba, who I can't see, but there you are. It's sort of in, and don't be put off by the mask. And over in this, in the dark, well, which she could step into the light. Oh gosh. I can't see where the light is. Well, yeah, okay. There we are. Well, that mysterious figure is Sarah, who has been the studio manager for I don't know how many years and saw through the biggest part of the Bible production here, and is still helps me with trying to keep afloat with all my old man's technical problems. So what I want to say is this: last week, the last time, I was talking about my beginnings and all of that, and influences, both from a life point of view, from culturally, and also the work of other calligraphers that I managed to see in the provincial little town that I grew up in, and the provincial art school that I went to, art college, and I missed out something. I missed out a lot of things, but one thing in particular that was influential, and some of the time I was talking last was about how I actually sought out 2 teachers in London and managed to get a scholarship to come and study there with them. But the year before that, I had gone to an exhibition in London. It was the first time I'd been to London in my then 18 years. Can I see this slide that we had first? Is that to me? That one, thank you. And this is, there was an exhibition in London, 1956, went down. My teacher, as I had said before, didn't actually give a lot of instruction because we were working towards a level that he hadn't himself studied to. But he was very encouraging. He arranged for myself and another calligraphy student to come to London, which was a big adventure, and we went to the exhibition. And in it, on the wall, was this piece of work by Irene Wellington, partly autobiographical in its own way, because she just put together fragments of pieces of jobs and work she'd done, and then she brought it bang up to date by simply inking the sole of her feet, or one foot, and stepping on to a piece of paper, and that was the last thing that went in it. So it went from early days of these other little jobs she'd done, and then she put that on. There was an example of something fresh, creative, classical in its execution, but very fresh in its in its concept. So I missed that, and it was current. It was pivotal, and she was one of the students. On the other hand, my main teacher was much more traditional and would no more than flying away have ever done anything like this. But he did more formal work. So I'm just now. That was what we missed, and I wanted to let you know about that. And now I'm going to move on to questions, which I have here. I'm going to look at them on my desk. And the first one I picked out. Now, what I wanted to first of all do is to say thank you to all of those people who responded to the talk last time. Sent some really nice comments in, and very encouraging that was to me, and also some questions. I read through all the comments, and I also read all the questions, and I just picked out a couple, just to respond to them and to encourage you to send in more if you have. I mean, it's obviously unrealistic to expect me to be able to give a seminar on that, but I'll just, in a word, one or two things. There was a question from Peter, and he asked me, really, it was quite a tough question. Would I be dramatically, he used the word, different calligrapher if I had not, without my strong, quote, religious background, unquote. Oddly enough, I didn't think I had a strong religious background. Certainly, I went to a little church school, which was a Methodist school, but certainly Methodists are not known for their interest in having illuminated manuscripts, but particular they're very, as the name suggests, they're a very sort of pragmatic approach to their approach to God, but I did have this very sensitive and artistic headmaster who did encourage me. But you know, we work with what we get. I mean, we are part of our culture. I mean, I would have thought it was just as much a culture of work and working and industry and factories and and the life about me than it was about religion. But I can't say. I mean, but it was good to ask the question. I mean, all I can say is in chapel, which I used to go to once a week, and I used to not listen to the sermons particularly because it didn't mean a lot to me being very young. But there was an inscription around the balcony, the foot of the balcony, which went all around, and it said, "Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness." Now, it didn't mean to literally go out and be a calligrapher, you can be sure, or be an artist. It just meant be beautifully holy, I suppose. It didn't mean more than that to me. What did attract me was, in my culture, is the art of books, of the book, and so much of it is involved in. Sorry, I just got off track a bit. Much of it, the book art of Christianity, that appealed to me. And who knows, if I had grown up in any other part of the world in another religious tradition, I would, who knows? I suppose that's the answer to the question in a way, but I'm trying to see something sensible in it, insofar as we are certainly molded by our culture, whatever it is, and I'm beginning to think that I'm going to come back to that point in a moment. So thank you, Peter, but I didn't feel strongly religious, actually, but who knows as a child whether I was and didn't know it. So much of that. Then there was a question from Holly Monroe about Cennini. She asked, to those of you who don't know, if the gilding technique or recipes that I used for most of my gilding work, raised and burnished gilding, was based on the writings of Cennino Cennini. I think probably 14th century or turn of the 14th, 15th century, professed to be a maker of frescoes, panels, really. And it's one of the very, very few treatises that has come down to us, which gives sort of pretty technical information about gilding. But he was talking about gilding techniques and the preparation of the gesso. But he was talking about panels, gilded panels on rigid wood. And whereas what happened was the turn of the last century, the 1900s, I ought to say, there was translation of his work, and people had to pick and choose what they thought. This is people who were illuminators who were working on parchment, and they had to pick parts of that recipe from the translation, and there was no specific. There's nothing really specific. It's like your grandmother giving you a recipe for your favorite ever cake. I mean, it doesn't ever work out like hers, and so it's very hard to put these things down. And the answer is, it's only vaguely based on Cennini, because there are arguments about the translation, and the other is I was taught some gilding techniques by somebody who didn't actually think that it was correct. So that's another long story. But Cennino Cennini, it is a technical question, and for that person, I'm just saying, Holly, that it's loosely based on that, and there isn't, and it's like the Holy Grail. It's there and then it isn't most of the time. That was a technical question, and seemed not to be feeling as if I'm answering them. But then there was a question from Leslie Mark from Kansas City, who I think worked with Hallmark cards as a calligrapher, and she was wondering if, since I was talking about how I was picking up grains of information here and there, and having to look at books which were rather badly printed, very few books, she wondered if, on the other hand, today, there is so much readily available and online or digitally that maybe that would work against somebody like me. That's if I was, born and inherited this kind of a scenery and options. It's a good point. I mean, again, it's sort of basically unanswerable, but it doesn't mean to say it's not a good question. I think for sure, I actually love it. I mean, I love the fact that there's all this information. I love the idea that you can play with the computers. When I first saw my first Mac, we did not have, I've never used them graphically until we started on the Bible project. And that was only basically so we could organize chunks of text. But I loved the way you could play with colors and vary them and so on. I loved all the information at the press of a button. But it doesn't mean to say that after all these millions of years that our hands are really only good to be used for pressing a button or moving a mouse around. So I suppose in a short, I'll refer back to things I was talking about last week, last time, is this. I don't quite know.
Somebody is disturbing your speech by moving papers and other stuff.
Not here.
Yeah, I know. I was seeing online.
All right, and okay. It sounded like plumbing. I was wondering what was going to sound I was going to hear next, but it is all right. We'll wait for that to happen if it has to. Yes, it did sort of break my train, but what I was talking about last time, whatever environment you're with, that's it. You work with it. But, and what I was talking about last time was, you can create within whatever, mayhem indeed, plethora, burdened with information. You can create your own bubble, your own creative bubble, and within that, look and explore your inner feelings and try to explore ways of making marks which somehow harness those feelings. Now, as I said, that's not putting your head in the sand. That's just creating and choosing your own space within to work within. I'm just taking a look at my notes for a moment here, and it says, working. There is no question that working with print and has never pressed my buttons. To go back on what I just said, I can't get involved in it. Whenever my artwork I'm working for print as part of one's job in life. It's never allowed me to feel those feelings that I need to feel when I'm doing things like that. So there is that does work against it, but yeah, computers are great, but you have to make choices. And I actually think, and I think that it may militate against children or younger people moving into life from wanting to ever dip a pen point in ink. On the other hand, it could drive them right into doing exactly that as an antidote to what the deficit, whatever deficit there is So that's that. And lastly, for now, there's a question, which again is this is a heavyweight one, which says, what is the most meaningful work you've done in your life, and what has it meant to you? How do you do that? So I've tried to answer it, and apart from perhaps the time that I actually made some marks with that first pen that was given to me by my aunt and given me the red ink, and you've heard me, the story of that that set me alight. Just dipping that pen, red ink, putting it onto a piece of paper. That is a feeling I go back to as a definition of a life changer. But she said a piece of work. So let's have that piece of work. Next one. I don't have to do it. That is it. And it's, I just call it the Black Cross. And it was a commission. Why is it the most, what's meant to me the most, what did it, meaningful? I don't know. What it meant to me was this. And if you hang in on these talks, you'll find out that I do find it really hard to get down to anything that's really asking the most from me. I'll do anything else almost than sit down and do a piece of work that somebody says, I will pay you to do anything you like. And I will go into a funk because I get fearful that when I ask myself to do something, there won't be anything there, and anything in any case that I do will only expose me to be a fraud, and all kinds of weird stuff like that. So I left this piece, I was commissioned along with a dozen other artists by somebody who put money on the table and said, I'm a dealer and I'm going to publish a catalogue and I'm going to sell it. It's very unusual that for calligraphers. And he said, I would like you, I've seen you do some things, and he noticed religious things. And he said, I'd like you to do Nunc Dimittis. And this is the quote. And that was it. The guy was coming in the afternoon. I don't know what's happening there, but it's not that. No, I don't know. That looks like a little whisker that's gone. Hi. What happened is, he was coming to pick it up in the afternoon. I had not done it in the morning, and it was a deadline. And deadlines, and they can either, well, whatever. I wrote that piece of uncialish writing. It seemed quite good. Felt that just wrote it. I then went out into the yard, picked up a box of apple box, thin, cheap wood, tore it apart, got an axe, chopped down one piece of it, took it back up to the studio, rolled black ink onto it, and stamped it. Can we have it back up? Yeah, and stamped it down the center, picked up the other piece, inked it up, which is what I'm looking at the left-hand side, put that on, and then, of course, I need to do the other half, so I just inked it up again and smacked it down. Then I took gesso and, with using a coarse brush, put in angel's wings, gilded it, and it was ready for when he turned up, practically wet. That piece I stood back having no connection. It just came. I felt that I just had a baby. I mean, it just was there. And he took it from me and I didn't see it again. And that piece, though, taught me a feeling. It introduced me to a feeling of lack of responsibility. The responsibility was not mine. It came to somewhere else, whatever label you want to put on it. Now is another story attached to that, but I will not hold up because I did get to meet up with it later in life. That piece, Find Me again. And if I've got time and I got a good enough excuse, I'll talk about that in again. So because now we're going to get on with the subject of tonight. That was a long session of questions. I think it took far too long for my waffling. I don't think, perhaps won't start with questions another time. We've got questions, right? But I'll take some of the time off the end, which is officially slated for questions. And so we'll get started on what we are talking about tonight. That's a subject. Here we are. What we'll start with is we'll just change a wee bit. I'm just going to do what I asked you to do last time, and that's to stick my pen in the ink, just to bring me down to earth. And do the usual introduction, if you can turn the camera on. And so we have the old A, we start off with. That's not supposed to look like a car crash. But the whole thing is that we can do, I'm just going to get rid of that. We've got the possibilities in our hands to take the lines for a walk. And this A can start with this. And we can come down with this, fairly graceful and light. So we can go from this point here, very fine. We can do something else here. We can make other matrices fine. We can do that. So this instrument, this just reed, can go from very fine and free and flow, and you can just go to that. You've got all of that space between. You can put that in delicacy, you can go skating on ice, and then you can right on your backside. This is where the fun is. So that's where you put your pen in the ink. Next time it comes out, and we can be doing stuff like this.
Does that ruin the read?
Sure did. No expense pad on this program. Okay, let's move on. It's all about putting the pen in the ink. Tonight, it's not a gallery show. It's a show of a lot of images, but I'm going to start by, it's about what happens to me as I go along as a calligrapher. Starting back, oh dear, leave that alone. Starting back, just to put you in space in time, this is me just out of college, wondering how to do calligraphy and make a living. I had to teach because of the government telling me I had to teach for a couple of years, rather than go in the army, which was the other option. And so in that room, I sat down and tried to do something which I've also said I was advised to do. If you put something in an exhibition, it should be either something you want to sell or you want other people to buy or commission, or you put in work which is something you wish people would ask you to do more of. So in that little room, I started out, and I showed this last time. I did a sort of showpiece scroll, which is something that, you know, I believed people would be prepared to spend money on, because this kind of thing went on a long time. It went on, it was common. I also did something I wanted people to ask me to do more of, because I wanted to do it. I wasn't committed to the religious side of it. I wasn't committed to even what the words were. I just had an image I wanted to push further. And what I didn't show last time was I also did this other piece for a show, which I hoped again. And every time they turned out to be religious. Now, a lot of that's to do with the fact that that's where you use gold. You use this medium where you immediately make marks, which have real deep seriousness. Serious enough to put gold leaf on, not because of the cost, but because you don't gold leaf a sort of road sign. I mean, just I'm getting lost of words here. Anyway, this was it. These were the three things that I put out there. And what I'm going to say to you is, they changed my life, because over the years afterwards, one way or another, those three pieces brought in exactly what I wanted, by the people who saw them and by the circumstances that those exhibiting those three pieces changed everything. And so I sat there in that room and I produced these rather pathetically simple pieces of calligraphy. I say pathetic because I felt that. I felt they were very tentative and so on. But it was a presentation scroll. You see, that was the world that I was thinking I was going to be having to do work for. Some small job I got for the church, not a very good reproduction, but remember, this is 60 odd years ago. So we're lucky to have something. And I didn't even own a camera. So a lot of the work just was never recorded. So books of remembrance in churches, very poorly paid, and also ran into difficulties because sometimes I wasn't even paid. I mean, even paid. They just didn't ever pay the bill. And then from that little room, I got married to Mabel. I was 24 years old, and we bought this house. And that was the state it was in. And what's more, it stayed very much that way until gradually over 5 years, I just fell in love with this house. It had atmosphere, built in the 1790s in central London. Whatever, I just fell in love with it. And my good, amazing wife was actually daft enough to just go along with it. But that took up a lot of my life. It became something quite smart. That is a younger version of my grandson, pictured outside the home his father used to live in, and literally restored the whole thing and practically went bust. But the thing that kept me afloat was this: fill-ins, humble fill-ins, and either done by me or by my assistant, as that was on the right. It's got a smear over it. Just a simple thing like this. But I learned something from this. I don't know what. This is my account book at the near enough then. I was making for the whole year. You can't actually read it. Actually, I think it was just about $1,500 in the year. If that's what £1,000 would be now, and some of that was from renting a floor, some of it was the teaching, and some of it was from working on calligraphy. So we were pretty strapped for money, and that influences what you do. During that time, I took in a couple of private students. One of them had seen a photograph of that scroll. I'd seen published in a catalogue in the US, Enid Perkins, New York. She struggled with gilding, saw that scroll, and contacted me in London and came over and had private lessons from me. Also, the guy on the right, Guillermo Rodriguez in Puerto Rico, a banker and brilliant man in many ways, he saw that same slide when somebody was touring, showing slides of it was called 1,000 Years of Calligraphy, and it was out of Baltimore and Washington. So over the years, that one scroll that I did and actually financed myself to do brought in two major things. One was Guillermo, who commissioned me to do a number of things, and also gave me a first place to call when I borrowed the fare, sold a house, moved down the street to a cheaper place, and started building a portfolio of work to bring to the US. And they were the first people that I called on, and I borrowed the fare to get there to New York. Guillermo commissioned me. This was the commission he gave me. Puerto Rican poet in Spanish, to Christ crucified. And that was the beginning of a wonderful friendship, and that I treasure to this day. And there's me preparing to go to the US in my new old house. And there is a map of Texas. Why? Surely enough, there must be a market for people wanting to buy a map of Texas. This is for an ignorant English person thinking to go to sell his stuff in the US. And meantime, doing this kind of work, painted lettering, I was taught by William Sharpington. This is engraved glass, sandblasted. This is me carving a sign. We remember the advice my main teacher gave me. He said, be able to turn your hand to anything. He encouraged me to do the bookbinding, to do anything, because he said, you're not going to make a living as a calligrapher. And there's that. This is me creating this for a group of, for a vegetarian restaurant, and which became a sort of small chain. And there are stories attached to all of these things. What I'm saying is, I wasn't just doing calligraphy. If I thought that this, which is the craftsman potter's shop, which was nearby to the vegetarians, that there's not much point doing calligraphy on that. So I created this out of stoneware, tiles, and it was said crafts and potter shop across the thing. So changing from carving to ceramic to engraving to calligraphy, all trying to do something. There is a common denominator. This is me painting the sign, another stuff for cranks. There's a whole chain of stuff. I'm going to go through this. So it seemed better to have, because of all the sort of handmade brown and pottery and so on, it seemed better to me to have a contrast, crisp contrast to this, was this thing. And we had fun. Then I put that in there to show you that we had a friend, we had a great time. I had various assistants, some of whose names are familiar in the US, Charles Pierce, and a whole string of people, but who'd stay. Perhaps Charles was with me quite a long time, and others who helped to do things. I've chosen work that I've done tonight, but they helped too. And so this is it, this kind of thing that a jobbing calligrapher does. And I've moved away from something which I really want to say, which is, well, what's going on? Why are they asking me to do this? Why are we doing, why are they asking a calligrapher to do things? And, you know, that was good fun, just did it. Again, you might be absolutely certain the printer was waiting at the door. This is, you know, for a TV station, a Welsh language TV station. And then back here again in the studio, always going through from 1964 would be these sorts of things I was doing for royal documents. This particular one, rather poignantly, was the consent for the marriage of Prince Charles to Lady Diana Spencer. And so there's a string of those, but there's something that's tying all these things together. And there we have this rather grand statement of an historic occasion, the marriage of a future monarch, etc. And on the other hand, you had me doing the British Telecom Long Service Award, which just involved the filling in of a name. And what is the common denominator? And this is what it is. You know, when I said, who needs it? Well, people don't need it until they see it or have it. That simple document, which said for the post office, we had big customers, the post office for the whole of the United Kingdom and the telecoms company, which were both government owned and run at that point. That is about doing something for somebody else. It's you're putting something of yourself into something to make it their name in that simple instance look as beautiful as possible. And it's done by hand, not by a computer. I can tell you a real story. In this room, I had done probably 1,000, or, you know, my assistant had actually done, I hadn't at that point filling in the names, but 1,000 certificates saying, thank you for being with British Telecom for X number of years, this, and this. And the guy that came to collect them was a hard-nosed union boss. He came in to this room and said, oh, what's all this? Yeah, oh, God, I don't want to waste my time. What? Who believes this rubbish, you know? And I said, well, you know, people seem to like having their names. He said, well, yeah. I said, yeah, all right, you put the names in. But he said, the signature there, that's printed, isn't it? And I said, no. And he said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, he said, that's such a body. His sworn enemy, the boss of the whole of the Welsh telecom thing. And these guys have been banging their heads together for years, you know, in meetings, the boss versus the union. And I said, no, he signed every one of those by hand. He said, what do you mean? He said, well, I happen to know he took 100 home every night for 10 nights, and he signed them all himself. The guy started tearing up. There was a connection that he'd never credited. It just caught him by a complete surprise that he cried. It was just that sense of these hands touching your hands by what you've just written on the page. Not my calligraphy or our calligraphy, but that's it. And so that's where we come in. We come in by handling words with emotion and beauty. And at the same time, even when we're filling in just a name, we are doing it in the best we can. And all the time we're doing these everyday jobs. We're actually looking to hit an inner harmonic. You're trying to strike a chord, which is a sweet spot when that pen touches that paper or whatever and makes those marks. And that you're handing over whatever way or other, which is, and the other person that you're doing this for, or anyone who sees it, you're giving them a service. So that applies right across the board, and it also begs the question to why would you want to be a professional calligrapher? Which means why would you want to do it in a way which means you have to make money from it? The answer I will come up with in the end for myself, but right now, even doing beautiful things, these then become production line at times. Sometimes the government, these are all the beginnings of royal documents. Some of those are done first and the writing afterwards, because every now and again the government will drop on you with wanting 12 of them, in a few days. And so that becomes, why is it not moving? Thank you. And again, they vary at different times, and you get to see formal things. Sometimes the Queen turns up to accept these things or give these things, and you're mixing on that level, and so you've got to polish up your act and look the part. And then this was a swingingly difficult commission. Government laws meant that all the boundaries of the cities changed, and legally they ceased to be in 1974. And I had to literally write out 43 of these in 2 weeks. And that meant just write out. Then they had to go to the House of Lords to have this seal put on them, and they were delivered back to me with the seal hanging on. And then you have to kind of work with that on your desk to put in this. And then this is one in preparation. Then we thread this through the bottom, this ribbon of vellum, to give the bottom of it rigidity. And then the E's had to go on. There's the 43 of them, one after another. And over probably about 2 months, the rest were all done. And here's a picture of me with a red box delivering my sort of 2 or 3 days worth of work to keep the guy inside the House of Parliament there, who had the seal of England, putting it on the seal onto the documents. I'm getting myself a bit mixed up. Whatever happened, then one day, as I'm nearing the very end, I get a call from the Crown Office to say, how come all of these are all wrinkled? And I didn't know what they're talking about. And it turned out they were assuming that it was me who had delivered them in this state. Whereas in fact, it was the guy who was putting the seals on, and they came out from the press hot, and he was using the tap to cool them down. And what he was literally doing was soaking the parchments, the vellums, in water, and then turned around and said, look what these look like. He didn't admit to the fact that he'd done it. And so this is the sort of thing, it's character building, this. When you're building up for something, you're doing loads of work, you're sleeping literally 6 hours a night and doing them, and in order to have them all ready to be presented at the right time. And so I don't know what happens next. I can go back, I suppose. Can I go back with doing that? Or how do I do? Do I do it this way? No. Right, so thank you. So just looking at that, I literally had to cut the seals off and start again. There were probably 3 or 4 more, which I managed to rescue by putting under a press, rehydrating and putting under a press. And even at the end of this project, they called up and said, we're one missing. We don't seem to have received it. And again, I knew I had sent it, but I had to do another one. And then after this guy who'd done the sealing left, they discovered yet another, but folded up and stuffed behind a radiator. So sometimes your work is not entirely respected or looked after, or anything else. The poor guy was just overwhelmed with too much work. And then other jobs. And this is one I'm going to continue a little bit with this, because this shows you that sometimes silly things that you got, that's how I do it. The silly things you get to do, and this was a bank, one of the main banks in the UK's ad campaign. They'd done a series of really successful cartoons on TV, commercials, and they wanted me to do some graphic interpretations of them. So I ended up having to paint this princess in a pseudo-illuminated letter. She's on the phone, obviously, an early cell phone, and but I had to learn to do it. I just had to be thrown in at the deep end to do it. And likewise, this other job here, where this is yet another of the cartoons that I had to take literally. I had to stare at the screen and work out the right moment to capture what was the key part of the punchline of the ad myself, and I had to then replicate it. But silly as that was, I mean, and again, you get paid so much more by the advertising business than you do from anybody else, because they get a percentage. But this is a direct, I want you to remember this. I'll go back, look at the hands. Oh boy, the hands. I was forced to do hands that looked sort of credible. And I then later on, from the Rodriguez family, was commissioned to do, guess what looks quite familiar, a Trinity. I was commissioned to do that. And again, I would have been at sea, but having done those hands, I'm sorry, I'm moving around because I'm actually, what's happening is I can't see what I'm looking at because of well, I can now. If you look at the hands there, and there, and there is a hand somewhere here, I actually couldn't have imagined doing those if I hadn't done that crazy ad, or those crazy ads. And doing that prepared me to be able to work on the St. John's Bible. It gave me the courage to be able to take on painting a face with an expression. And this is Adam and Eve. So what I'm really saying is, for all of that sort of bread and butter there is always room to learn, and from those simple beginnings and putting the bread on the water brought all of these things in. There are more. How this is another way, and again, this is I'm putting this on because it's a traditional thing I like to show, and it's me working on a formal document, a formal book for the post office, and a book of signatures, and I come up with this pseudo-Victorian detail at the end of a ribbon, and at the end of it a jewel. Unfortunately, it's on paper. You can't correct on this kind of paper. And I dropped a blob of blue ink onto the plain white page. And so what I then did was painted the star, the jewel, without a jewel, and painted the jewel as if it had dropped right on top of the blue blob that I had. I got rid of my mistake by making it into a jewel. So, you know, you can have fun, and you can also, as you do these things, and I love the idea of being able to get away with it by doing something like that, which dropped out of its socket. So that's a traditional one. But then I stole the idea that I got for myself on one thing, which was on the post office. And this is a play job where I was paid to play, given a quotation, and said, just do what? And it's all about the neurosis of artists and musicians and creative people, and how most of us enjoy what they've done at the cost of their pain. And so there you recognize the jewel I took and used it again on the thing. So, and so on back to, this is one last little run. This is where Guillermo Rodriguez and I are working together. And he commissioned me to come to Puerto Rico and work on a book, which he was himself very interested and extremely capable calligrapher. And he had me, basically, he had the money to hire me to go out there and be his private tutor, live in his home and create the book while I was there. And the idea was quotations and alphabets and some decorative thingies. And so there were different ones. This is just a little selection. This was Versals. And remember, this was 1974, I want to say. Could have been 1973, 5, something like that. And so I was having fun, and this time being paid to play on parchment, on vellum rather, and playing with different alphabets. There's the alphabet, there's the quote in the alphabet, and again, there's another one, fooling around with italic. If we had more time, I'd give you a critique of that, which might be useful to you, but we don't, so we'll move on. And then had fun painting bugs. And those of you who remember what we talked about last time was one of my earliest things I loved and made me want to do illumination, was looking in a book which had lots of leaves going in between all of the lines, and that was a little thing from the past that came out there, playing with Gothic, not my normal kind of scene. But in the end, the only other, shall we say, dimension to one's calligraphy life and work is playing. And that play is the other element. That putting the emotion into what you do, and looking for those little tiny victories where something goes right, where it just rings that little harmonic bell. But the playing is another one where it's just nobody's paying you to do it, and you're just trying to see what happens when you put that pen on the paper, and things of this kind. Now, at the end, I just have one other thing. I was playing, but this did end up being something which was for the obviously the magazine and The Economist, but there is a link here which will take us to what happens in the final session that we have of these 4 sessions, is that was part of that cover. I used the artwork from that as part of the pitch to St. John's Abbey and University when it came to discussing whether or not I should be commissioned to carry out the St. John's Bible. And that was a commercial. It can't be much more commercial, The Economist. But a thing like that, that side of my life linked straight into the final story, which we'll be coming to later. I think that's probably the last thing. And we just ended there with me not having said anything like I would like to have done, but there we are. So I will come to some questions in a moment, but let me just gather my thoughts here. Along the way, I have, of that lifetime of doing lots of things, so you've got the strands. I haven't deliberately talked about teaching in any referentially, which I'll be doing next time, where I'll be talking about, spreading the word, as it was. It turned out to be. It turned out when I first came to New York, I met the best people, kindest people, and extremely high-level graphic design and people who'd, some from Europe, some homegrown in the US, and who'd settled there into New York, and who were not in any way suspicious of me moving in on their patch, but welcomed me with open arms. And I could give you a list of names. I won't, not right now. But I was met with kindness, and I did sell a lot of that portfolio of work. And that gave me a huge start, and both in my own confidence and in what turned out to be a way of life thereafter. And so where did I didn't mean to get to that just at that point. Anyway, going back over, I have actually sat and tears have gone down my nose and dropped onto the work that I was working on during the course of those working life, when a client has come into the room. When I was in that room as a student, just as a post-student, you saw the shot of me sitting at my desk in that one room near to my college. And the guy could not believe I'd been recommended to do something as a 85th birthday presentation for Sir Winston Churchill. And he was in charge of it. And when he came, he said, I need to see it. Well, that was smart because, of course, as I have confessed, I generally leave things to the last minute. On this time, I hadn't, and it was in the process. He turned up, and he was shocked to find this 21-year-old doing this, what he considered to be very responsible position and job. And he just harangued me. I mean, he just basically kept on calling me up and saying, is it finished now? And he couldn't trust me. He didn't trust me. And at that, in the end, and that I ended up with the tears dropping onto the piece of work, which fortunately I was able to rescue. So you can put a lot of yourself into these everyday jobs, as I would call them, some of them very high quality requirements. But at the end of the time, I actually think it's the play. When I look back, it's what I chose to show, and I wasn't being paid for. I have done a lot of things that were the best of my ability and I have relatively well succeeded, which I was paid for. But those routine tasks, I don't have many pictures. Those 2 certificates were all I could find. We used to do thousands for, and I say we, at one point, 7 people worked here. And that again was a preparation for the St. John's Bible, because there was not just me, there were other people working, and I had to know how to handle that situation. And so all of these things prepared. So I'm going to stop now for a minute and ask Kitty if she's got some questions for me. I'm going to have a drink of water, and we'll move into question time. And I'm going to just let go of the stuff that I haven't said yet. Maybe I'll say it shortly. I'm just going to get a drink.
Thank you, Donald. I'm looking over lots of questions, but there are so many wonderful comments that you'll want to read later. So many people feel relief that you're like they are.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
I'm just writing down this question that just came out.
You carry on. Actually, on that point, even the simplest handwritten, look, you know it, we are fortunate in being, I mean, I say we as calligraphers, but then there are many people who are not. I mean, one of the things, just getting a handwritten letter nowadays is a pleasure, the simple pleasure that gives, that somebody took the trouble to acknowledge you, to send it. If it's gorgeous to look at, it wouldn't be one of my letters. At one time, Lou Strick, who was the creator of the Pentalic and Taplinger Publishing, and was a great support to calligraphy in the 70s and 80s, 90s. He wrote, if this helps anybody, he spoke to me, he said, could you possibly in future type your letters to me about business? He said, because actually I will confess that what we do is we have a pinboard in the office, and I put your letter on it and pin it on, and I invite interpretations from all the rest of the staff, and between us we usually figure out what it was you were trying to say. So you know, but still it was said, it looked good, but it didn't create anything other than a good impression. Didn't create any information. Right, are you ready, Kitty?
Sure.
Whoops. Yeah.
So we have a question from Todd Jameson. Who was writing all those formal documents before you had a chance to do them?
There was a guy called, in the old days, I mean, on one of the slides I have showed you, on the wall was a vast parchment with big, huge, I mean, hand-sized coats of arms down the sides of it. And that would have been done by the old Victorian scrivener illuminators that would be somewhere behind, you know, in the back office in the House of Lords. And so as recently, I don't know, probably in between the First World War, past, you know, in between, probably 1919-ish, I'm guessing on that. Grayley Hewitt was an illuminator, and he was, by the way, the other thing that impressed me in that 1956 exhibition. There was some of his work, and that was covered in gold, and it was exquisite. And that must have made a big impression. I didn't imagine I could ever do it, but there was a cultured man in charge of the Crown Office, and he said, "Look, we can't have these gross sort of looking scroll shop pieces of work. There is such a thing as a craft revival. There is he knew about Edward Johnson. He knew about the calligraphy resurgence at the turn of the century, 19th and 20th centuries, and he said, let's commission somebody who's a real, an artist calligrapher. And so that guy was called Grady Hewitt, and he was a student of Johnston's, an ex-lawyer, and he and his assistant called Ida Henstock. So that's H, Henstock, Hewitt. He was called H1, she was called H2. And she did a lot, he did a lot, they worked together. So that's first. Then he died, Ida Henstock carried on. And when she said, I can't do this anymore, oh, by the way, after he died, they appointed another person, so there would always be two. So if one person wasn't on hand to do the overnight business that I was talking about, then there would be somebody else who could step in. She was called Dorothy Hutton, and if you're a student of 20th century calligraphy, she was part of that Society of Scribes and Illuminators. The senior people. Ida Henstock got to the point where she got too rheumaticy, and they looked for a replacement for her. So that's only Hewitt and Henstock together, Dorothy Hutton, and they were looking for another person. The person in charge made a selection, and before he sent out an invitation to 5 calligraphers, I think it was, or 6, to see if they were interested in doing this work. It was quite prestigious, not very well paid, another whole story. And he just, as an afterthought, said to Dorothy Hutton, is there anybody whose work you think might fit in well with what we need, because you know? And she said, well, there's this young guy, Donald Jackson. He put this scroll on an exhibition, the same scroll, the same piece of advertising that I'd done, in my, when I was 22 or something like that, and or one. And she'd seen all the gold on it, and she wasn't all that confident in gilding herself. Actually, she was a good illustrator and an artist, and a sensitive designer. So he put me on the list, and they chose me in the end. Everybody was commissioned. They did not, to give them their credit, they didn't say, do something for free. They said, we will commission you to do 3 peerages each. They're mostly for peerages at that point. And then they looked at the work, and they chose me. I always used to say, it's because I was only 10 minutes drive away from the House of Lords. But that's how it happened. And that's who did it. Next question.
Yeah, so Deborah Bennett wanted to know how many calligraphers work for the Queen, I guess, in general, or right now. So is it always 2? And are you working with someone now?
I'm not doing it anymore. This is the sad story, folks. There were never vast numbers. A dozen a year would be it. It's only when somebody was made, as it were, our equivalent of a senator. To be made into a lord, and that would be that. And then the very occasional royal consent document, like the one that I showed you, the marriage consent. Except when a government changes, then there are lots of recommendations so that one part or the other should, be kicked upstairs, as they call it. And so then there would be a deluge, there could be 30 wanted, and there's still the same 2 people. But in fact, I was fortunate because I had an assistant who could do good illumination. That was Wendy Selby. She was Wendy Gould, and I had others who helped me. And right up until fairly recently, Sarah took up the job of senior illuminator in the scriptorium, to doing the illuminated E's, which I then hand finished later. So there was usually me, I either wrote them or mostly write them or sometimes didn't. But mostly me, I mean, not, well, no, always my hand on it. But there were times when I could not cope. But then still managed to somehow in those days. But the sad story now is that because I was working on the St. John's Bible, I have to say, which is quite a big job in itself, and we were deluged. By this time, Tim Node had moved in as a recommendation of mine to take over from when Dorothy Hutton retired. And so he's a very skilled heraldic artist and a fellow of the Society of Scribes and Illuminators, brilliant. There are even fewer now, very few, because guess what? Somebody discovered that there's something called a bubble jet printer that will work on vellum. So they print them by computer and just hand fill in here and there. This is on the shall we say, the highest document in the land is done mostly by bubble jet. Tim does the very special ones for something like the Supreme Court, which still sticks to doing them by hand. So we are leaving different kinds of heirlooms to the future, I'm afraid. Calligraphically, that's probably as much as I need to say about peerages.
Next question. That sort of leads into this next question. Have you created any, but this is Eric McClellan. Have you created any pieces that you have chosen not to sell because they hold very special meaning to you? The hardest holding back special things.
Not really, because this is that peculiar situation, which is partly to do with my upbringing and my character, which is I never maneuvered myself, and I've so admired people like Thomas Ingmeyer, who's managed to do this, into a position where I could work like a painter, where you do actually sit, you can have a gallery, or I'm not saying that's what he does, but what I'm saying is sits and does not mix up money with the art. I've always somehow or other relied on it as for my income rather than teach. Now, teaching I have done and enjoyed doing, but generally, whatever, even a thing like the St. John's Bible, you are doing it for somebody. And there is something that can come in between. It had to be a lifetime of work for me to be able to stand up for myself and say, I want to do it this way. But that shopkeeper son in the back of my head is still trying to please. I'm trying to meet that person. That's the other aspect of all that experience, is you're doing it for someone. Not just for yourself. That's what the role was. And in this case, I was doing it for a religious community. And that I was allowed, I always had that in mind. So there is a different chemistry there, where, that's why my closing comments this evening, well, I don't know how far we are off the end. Do we have anything for the last half hour?
We've got at least.
How long do we have? I'm sorry.
As much time as you want, 12:30, 11 minutes.
Yeah, okay, so that's about 11. Yeah, oh, that's fine. Okay, it's just, so I'm sure I had something else up my sleeve. No, I don't.
We have three more questions. Did you want me to go through those, or did you want to wrap up?
Yeah, that's fine. As long as they bring up, well, that was a good question, which I didn't answer. I have to say, there are one or two around, but they're generally speaking ones which I have given to my wife, and so they don't gets old.
That's
For
lovely.
that reason, yes. So that's the sort of thing I'm trying to think about. I can't think about what's most precious to me. I mean, I have to say the Black Cross was, but I'm happy to be where it is. Maybe I should tell you the story about that. No.
Sure.
We'll be talking about the conferences and things of that kind and how next time. But on the way to, I think it was the second conference, all of the tutors, as you traditionally, or it was a new tradition then, were to bring a piece of their work to put on the wall as an exhibit during the week of the conference. So that was one thing that we were supposed to do. And I was so flat out doing the kind of things that I've been sharing with you that I just didn't do anything for, and I think on that occasion, I was sort of keynoting the morning's sessions for the conference together with Kaz Tanahashi from San Francisco. And if I've got the right conference. Anyway, I end up sitting on a plane with Anne Heckel, one of the other instructors, Peter Halliday, another, three of us on a 747 heading out to Minneapolis. And just before we left, I turned to Mabel, my wife, and said, you know what, I wish there's one piece of work I would like to have, and if I'd thought about it, I would have chased it up. I had one piece of work I would like to have shown. And I said, it's the Black Cross, but I had no idea what the dealer had done with it, so on and so forth. The week before, I arrive at Minneapolis. I get to the, I actually was coaching the coordinators, or whatever you call them, facilitators for the week in the evenings. And I got there in the morning and I was teaching a class of the 24 or 26 or 22 facilitators. And as one of them was leaving, I met her before, previous years. She said, by the way, somebody came into my frame shop this morning and with a piece of work of yours. I'm getting goosebumps all over again when I think of this. And obviously you know what's going to happen. So I said, I couldn't think of any pieces of work floating about that would. She said, he said, well, I told him I'm going to be seeing you tonight. He said, well, wait until you see him because he may have suggestions for how to frame it. And I said, what was it? She said, well, it's a kind of black cross. And she said, well, I said, good grief. She said, I said, well, who's got it? She said, well, it's this guy. She gave me his phone number. He was some a kind of help for the Bishop of Minneapolis. He'd seen it in a catalogue, he explained to me, and bought it, or the bishop showed it to the bishop, and the bishop had bought it to go in the cathedral in Minneapolis. So I said, well, when's that? When did you buy it? He said, I don't know when he bought it, he said, but I picked it up today. I said, what do you mean picked it up? He said, in those days you could do this. He said, well, I picked it up off the plane from London that came, it's difficult, that came in this afternoon. And on that flight, I turned to those two other calligraphers and said, you know what, the thing I would have liked to have had was the Black Cross to show on the wall of Minneapolis. And it was flying with me on that plane. And to somebody I was going to meet that evening. And I said, good grief. And I said this to the man who brought it into the frame shop, and I said, I wonder if the bishop would lend it for a week. And he said, I think in the circumstances of your story, he's not in any position to refuse. So I did get the story out, and I sit on that. It's very occasionally I tell it, but it takes quite a lot of explaining away, whatever you'd say. I'm sure a statistician would shred it, but there we are. So another question have we got time for?
Donald, we have 3 technical questions. I'll put 2 of them together, and then I'll do the third one, and then you'll do whatever you'd like for wrapping up. So Allison Clement says, I see a lot of quills in your studio. Is that the primary tool that you have used for lettering? And from Mina Taylor, what kind of ink did you use for the many documents that you did for Parliament?
A quill par excellence, the tool, because it gives the maximum amount. Right. I mean, I always swoon when I see an Oriental calligrapher working with a brush, and think of the contrast you can get from the finest line to the thickest splodge of ink has got so many possibilities in between it as a tool. But the quill, and tonight I showed a reed, I showed you, it can go from fine to absolute impact of an explosion on the page. It needs to be nurtured, it needs to be kept sharp. It sometimes isn't sharp, but that doesn't matter because the form of the letters flows from your hands. It's made of the same substance as your fingernail. It's a part of you. It becomes part of you, just as a violinist plays wonderful sounds out of basically a cigar box, with a string tight across it. And so the primitive tool of a quill is capable of creating some of the most extreme. I mean, some of that copper plate, which was the original writing, incredibly fine and varied and so on. But it's sympathetic, it's warm, and it takes to ink. Coming to your second question, if you dip a steel pen with varnish on it into ink, the ink rolls back off it to begin with until it bites into somehow or other into the metal. And the metal is not so generous. It doesn't impart the ink with the same ease. So it provides flow through that slit. The touch on the surface is subtle, and its answers every tremble. Steel pen you could put down there and hold it there, and it wouldn't pick up your heartbeat. A quill will. Now the ink, the point is sticking. So the only point there is control, because there's not usually a store that you can walk into and buy a bottle of ink that's going to flow readily, or give you that action. When you put your foot on the gas with a pen, you want it to go. You don't want it to stick or stutter because it's too gloppy in the ink. So the way that you get over that is that you get basically soot, oil. I don't know. It could be either oil-based soot, or it can be from special woods bound with a little touch of gum, so that when you grind that in water, you can control the fluidity. Most of the time nowadays, you're better off just mixing it from out of gouache or something like that. But I mean, I can't point you in the direction of a bottle of ink that is great. You can get used to anything. I'm amazed at Higgins, people always used to use something called Higgins ink in the US. And I couldn't get that to work, but other people could. They got round it. It was more difficult for them than making a stick ink, grinding it, and to produce the right viscosity. You can always add a drop of water if it gets a little bit too sluggish, or, you know, add a little more ink if it gets watered. So it's one thing you take responsibility for. You do it because it does what you want it to do, rather than, you know, buying it off a shelf. I've never been interested in the cookery side of calligraphy. I truly, you know, to ask me, for instance, about Cennini's recipes, I know about the history of it. I know a lot about how people got to where they were. The question mark is still in the air, by the way, about how to get really good, reliable gesso. It certainly was done in the Middle Ages. I think in that case, I actually put a card on the table. I think it was something called parchment size. So in other words, you boil up the offcuts from the parchment, or I'm using the word parchment, I'm kind of saying at the moment, and boil it up until it becomes a sort of gelatin, and then you warm that up and turn it into liquid again, and then you put that in your lead and your plaster and your whatever else. That I think is much more like what I think happened. But who has been able to pass that on? It hasn't been able to be passed on. I've tried it myself, and I was pointed in that direction, but it didn't work so well as the kind of Grady Hewitt based fish glue and animal glue binder. And when that works, it's like magic. But I also know that the considered opinion of his chemist, if you like, right-hand man, was that it should be parchment size. I can't recommend it as something that's worked for me. But I still feel that's the holy grail, that bit I talked about earlier. So stick ink, quills, very fine work. To be honest, I would use a steel pen for tiny lettering, if need be. I mean, I'm talking almost invisible, and that it gives you a control, because the quill is a little flexible, and if it's flexible in the tiniest extra pressure, it will pick up on. And so that really, I'm talking 1/16 of an inch. I'm really talking that height. Then I'd go to steel. Okay, that I think is a fairly full answer to that question. Have you anything else to
Yes. So I've got another technical question. Then two other really good questions came up at the end, which I think would be good ones to, you'll probably need another hour to answer those.
No, well, that's what I'm a bit afraid of. That's all right. We'll meet up again.
Yes. So let me give you this technical question from Saritha D. I am very intrigued with the double lined letters. Do you need a special pen to do those?
Yep, you can. I've been wondering, I couldn't remember what pen I used for that, but I'm pretty sure, having given you the whole Megillah on quills and reeds, I'm fairly sure that in 1960, right, it was early 70s. That double line italic was done by a what do they call the automatic pen with a notch out of it. So that was probably done with steel or brass. That's a sort of flexible one, but I think it probably is brass, isn't it? Nickel plated. I have some old ones, although I have also quite successfully used a broad turkey quill, which has been flattened under heat and cut 2 notches and made 2 separate nibs out of the end of it. So you can do it that way. You can do it out of a reed. If you put 2 slits and then cut 2 nibs out of the same, and then you could then do it. You then, it will work. on it for a limited amount of time. So I think that's it. Although it seems to me, I haven't seen that book since 1990. So that's 30 years ago. So I can't now remember how I did it. I looked at a slide and couldn't make up my mind. There we are. That's the best shot I've got. Other one.
Okay. So Goli Ostovar asks kind of a big question. And I think in a way, this is the reason that I decided to ask the Society for Calligraphy if we could have you as a lecturer, not just a lecturer, but a series of lectures, so that it could reinvigorate all of the people from all over the world that are watching you now to go out and inspire young people and older people to do calligraphy if they
and then I come along and tell you that you end up weeping over what you do.
I know, and that's why we do it. We have to. But here's the question, Donald. Goli Ostovar says, how do you keep calligraphy alive and create enthusiasm in the younger generation who are tied to iPhones? They're not even being taught cursive in the schools. What do you do? And also Barry Morentz has the same kind of lament. What do you say to
And say I've completely failed with my own granddaughter. I have tried various ways. I mean, I don't know who she takes after, but she's not too keen on receiving instruction that way. If she sees it as instruction. So I will say failed there. So speaking as a failed teacher in that respect, and she has a gift. She has a gift. She has it without any instruction. It's there. And I should know, but that she doesn't realize that either. So, but it's to do with the person in this case. I mean, she doesn't think she's very good at stuff, and I relate to that. And it doesn't matter how many people tell you you are. It's you still, whatever. If you don't do a lot of work on yourself, you're going to keep on repeating your own sort of. You put limits on yourself, and I think that's what's happening there. The key is engagement, somehow or other, to engage the kids in children. Quite frankly, the whole thing about, as you say, penmanship or learning to write by hand, it is countercultural. Now, if we could sort of get them to think they were rebelling by doing good handwriting or lettering, then maybe you get engagement. I'll tell you a quick story on that. Los Angeles story. One of your members, or in the past, came to a class and she said she was just about to be fired or let go, as you say, from her art class because the school district she was in the LA area, whatever it was, said they couldn't justify the expense of art, and she was teaching calligraphy mainly. And what she was doing was relating to the kind of graffiti that kids were using on the walls around the city. And she was coming to them that way. She was also teaching them black letter. Now, in that school, the way that they then, as I understand it, if you turn up, unless you turn up in the morning and work the way through the school day, you don't get to do the last class of the day. You don't get to. And they put her lessons at the end of the day, and the kids were coming to school just to come and do their black letter lessons. And they were still going to fire her until she came up with this. And it sort of sums up the position of calligraphy, really, culturally, in our culture. She said, they said, well, how do you justify what you do? She said, well, it's teaching them English language skills. Oh, well, in order to do the lettering, they've got to be able to learn to write, and they're writing, and they're having to put letters into words and words into sentences. And these kids who are coming and going without learning, they're now learning to read and write. Oh, you can keep your classes. So I wouldn't advise you to go to the lengths of starting to teach football or whatever else school thinks is important these days, just to be able to get them to do calligraphy. But that engagement at whatever level, there were two parts to that question. One was kids, basically, and that's tricky unless you can somehow work out, and there are better brains than mine on this subject. This point is what I was wanting to be my closing remark to you all today, and will be, actually, I have to say, but this must be the final question, and it'll be my last word on it. The last one was, and it was Barry's, I think, to do with Barry's question, was to do with how to keep calligraphers motivated. And I think if you look back at my sort of very truncated display of things I've done over the last 60 years or more, the things that moved me forward, the things that even provided me with the opportunity to be asked to do things which I wanted to do, started with play. Playing without any need to please anyone other than taking a line for a walk. Some thought came into my mind here. Making marks and deciding what pleases you. What pleased you? What pleases you about some shape or other? We've all pretty much got an agreement about what's vertical. And we've also got pretty much agreement. I mean, I'm not talking about people with astigmatism or whatever, but there is an agreement what is that way, what is that way. And there's some harmonic, an inner harmonic I mentioned, something when a little tingle of pleasure comes from something because of what it looks like or felt like that pay off. What's in it for you? You know, how do you keep people interested? Is because there's something in it for them, something emotionally in it for them. And so play, creating spaces within which to play in your life and with whatever tools. You might say, oh yeah, but I don't know how to work those tools. Okay, look, go down to the beach if you're in Los Angeles and do some lettering in the sand and let the sea wash over it, because that's what time is going to do with all of our work eventually. So why are we doing it? We're doing it to grow into that space that we create. And you play. There was something that came to my mind earlier today. Lots of things come into my mind when I'm thinking I'm going to be talking with you, everybody. And then they go out, but it's also tricky to put them over. But all I can say, I've written it down somewhere here. The chemistry of the act. Now, I don't know. That means what goes on inside you when you make an action. But finally, play is the best. Play is the key. Put that pen in the ink and play. And the more open you can be to that happening that instant, then the more success you'll have, and then you get that pay. We are evolutionary programmed to keep doing different things, to change things, to put this here and see what that looks like next to that, to do several more of them for their own sake. Just doing that for its own sake is the key of evolution, which is plugging away in all of us. And so I think that's probably it. We start thinking quite basically about it. Think about our personal evolution, play for its own sake. Okay, I'm going to say that because I repeated myself already too much. I've kept awake far longer than I normally would be and on these occasions, so I'm glad to say it's nice to be meeting up with you again. And I hope I'll see and hear from you with more questions next time. So can I say goodbye?
Thank you, Donald. That was magnificent, and you'll enjoy reading the chat accolade.
Thank you. Always very nice to hear from you. Means a lot.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Donald.
Bye from...
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Donald.
Thanks,
Miss
Miss Terry. Thank you,
Bye.
Kitty,
Guys, that was
everyone,
fabulous.
Christy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Donald, time to play.
All right, I'll end the meeting and see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Kitty.
Delightful. Thank you too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.